how do we adjust for that, or when do we not need to adjust? And ultimately, obviously, it comes down to that combination of both the quantitative and the qualitative data that's going to help us sort of determine when it makes sense to jump in and change a process.
Welcome to the All in Recruitment podcast by Manatal, where we explore best practices, learnings, and trends with leaders in the recruitment space. If you like our content, please subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify to stay tuned for our weekly episodes. My name is Lydia, and joining us today is Amber Schwartz, Director of Talent Acquisition at Salesloft. Welcome, Amber. Good evening to you, and thank you for joining us.
It is an absolute pleasure to be here, Lydia.
So, Amber, walk us through your journey in the talent space. I understand you've spent a little more than a year at Salesloft now, and you've climbed the ladder quite fast.
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey in the talent acquisition space started right out of college at a large staffing agency, and then transitioned to a smaller regional agency where I had the opportunity to lead our on-site teams at one of our largest customers. And that ultimately led to my transition to in-house recruiting, and specifically have been within the SaaS space for 7 years, and it's Salesloft for just over 3.5 now.
So what are some takeaways that you've had working in an agency that you've brought into your positions in-house?
Yeah, I think first of all, starting as an agency provides an excellent foundation. I mean, the training that you can get, especially at a large agency, is incredible. But also the skills that you learn and how to communicate it at several different levels, communicating with candidates, communicating with customers, communicating internally with salespeople and with other recruiters. That skill is sort of invaluable when you go internal. But also I think there's a level of sales, right? You're selling opportunities for companies that you're not even a part of. And so being able to do that, it makes it a lot easier when you're now a part of an organization and really understand, what makes it so special by being there. It makes that, selling a candidate on why they should join a lot easier.
So what are some observations that you've made about the demand and availability of talent during this time, these 3 years, or maybe it's very critical 3 years that we've seen so many disruptions in, right? So do you have any interesting insights that you can share?
Yeah. I mean, I joined Salesloft in January 2020, and I've truly seen both the evolution of Salesloft growing from a just shy of 400 person company up to 1,000. So have been along for not only this evolution and change of Salesloft, but also, quite frankly, maybe one of the most disruptive 3 years for the talent market. And so for us, we had a very short sort of like pause in 2020 post-COVID where we weren't necessarily doing a lot of hiring. We were in that wait and see period. Are we going to be at home for 2 weeks? Are we going to be at home for 2 years? We don't know. And then saw a pretty steep uptick towards the end of 2020. And then obviously 2021 was a significant year of growth, not only for the company, but specifically for the talent acquisition organization. I took over that team in 2021, and the market for recruiters, when you're trying to build a team to be able to serve the business and the business's needs, it was extremely challenging. But I think, one thing remains the same, regardless of the market. If we want to define it as an employer market or a candidate market, you still have to be a great place to work and a place that attracts talent. And I think that that's something that I'll kind of call out over the last 3 years. It doesn't matter who's got the upper hand. A company should always be focused on putting their best foot forward as it relates to sort of candidate experience in the process.
So how, in that period of transition, you came in January 2020, right? So in that period of transition, having that sales mentality, as you mentioned earlier, inside the organization, what was the culture like, trying to maintain that sort of culture during that period of disruption?
I will say specifically to Salesloft, while 2020 at some points were certainly difficult, it was also kind of a propelling event for our company because our software became a maybe specific to early adopters within the tech space, to almost a must-have for all companies as they transition their teams remotely and had to come up with different ways of how they engage with customers, or for sales leaders, how were they managing these teams of SDRs or AEs that they were so used to being able to sit next to and coach. Like, they needed to come up with new ways to be able to serve their employees, but also their customers. And Salesloft just happened to be that solution that was a great fit to be able to meet all of those needs. And so, while I do think, it was certainly an adjustment, right? When you're taking a company that people are looking at the culture as being in the office and getting lunches, and it's easier to sort of maintain a culture when it's right in front of your face and you're around your colleagues. And so I think the most challenging part is probably the last, let's call it, year and a half of we're starting to lose that. We're post COVID in some sort of sense, and now we're trying to really be focused on what does the future look like, and how do we make sure we keep our employees engaged. I think a bit of the work from home, like, this is so much fun, is starting to wear off. Let's be honest, no one wants to be on a virtual happy hour as much as we did probably in early 2020 when it was still like a new thing. And so I think that's been the most disruptive stage, which is just our company has grown significantly, and how do we make sure we're maintaining the values and the culture that's now having to evolve.
Yeah. So has that contributed to your approach towards talent acquisition, especially now? And you've seen these changes in the past 3 years, and you've also moved on to different roles, right? So what is your approach towards talent acquisition, especially now in tough market conditions, and then you also see stiff competition, right?
Yeah. So I think, my evolution in Salesloft, I came in as an individual contributor working with our managers. And what I've taken with me as I've sort of taken on the global function of TA at Salesloft is I've taken the things that worked really well for me, and helped our team individuals sort of make that work in their own way. And for me, I think accounts for much of my success is it's the relationship piece with managers, and that desire to be a true partner as opposed to just a support function. And so that's something that we're really focused on. And I think especially in tough conditions, or if you're dealing with stiff conditions, hiring is a team sport. When you have a role open, it doesn't 100% fall on the recruiter, right? Like, we have to be in partnership with our managers. And I think one thing that we're focused on today is how do we get creative with involving our hiring managers earlier in the process? And so for us at Salesloft, that means we're giving our hiring managers LinkedIn recruiter seats. They are doing outreach and sourcing alongside us. We're setting up sort of those cadences of, we reach out on this day, but we need you to reach out the next day. And we've seen a really positive result. And candidates like that, right? Like, it's nice to feel like you're wanted by the hiring manager and that they are reaching out specifically to you, because their inbox is more than likely full of other recruiters reaching out. And so I think really getting creative in how we get in front of the talent. And I think the second piece is ensuring there's a consistent message around why someone might want to work here.
I like that creative approach that's being taken to reach out to candidates. It's nice to see there's an experimentation with the outreach and the sourcing itself, right? So do hiring managers who take part in this, who have contributed to this new cadence that you've set?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think there are certainly specific stakeholders that more naturally fell into this, right? Like, I think about our sales organization. They were ready to jump in. They, were creating their own messaging. They were, very excited about this. But we've also seen a lot of success on our technical recruiting side as well. And I do think it takes a little bit more of the enablement and education and assisting with writing that outreach and making sure that they are comfortable, right? Because that's a big piece. And helping them understand sort of like the benefit and the data behind, hey, when we reach out ourselves, this is our response rate. But when we've integrated a hiring manager within the process, this grows exponentially. Or you start to think of that like time to fill for a role, right? Like if we can be more intentional before a role is even open and using our hiring managers to start building these networks of potential pipeline and talent, the decrease in time to fill typically gets a manager, regardless of how uncomfortable they're feeling. If they know that we can fill the role 15 days quicker or whatever it might be, we haven't faced a lot of pushback when we're sort of leading with that like data and clear examples of why it's working. And I think that's sort of important in general. I think oftentimes we like to bring up things that aren't working, and it's easy to talk about all the things that aren't working, but I think in general, I try to put on a pedestal what is working and making sure that those leaders are also engaging with other leaders across the business and sharing that they've been successful. Because it's one thing hearing from me or one of our recruiters, here's all the great things that we've done, but being able to have a partner or a stakeholder talk to one of their peers and say like, this worked on my role, I think is helped us overcome any pushback that we may receive from a manager.
That's great. And then this also would, I imagine, contribute to a different form of process altogether, right? And if you've got that set and you'll see the results in a specific time frame at least. Now, as
Right.
TA, as a leader of talent acquisition in your organization, you'd also need to look into developing strategies that not only fulfill business needs now, right? You also look at those strategies that will fulfill business needs in the foreseeable future, at least. So what are some ways that you would think about maybe future-proofing recruitment?
Yeah, I think this is such a great call, and I think it's top of mind for me. And I know for a lot of other TA leaders that I talk to, we're all thinking about this. The roller coaster that TA has experienced over the last 3 years of being, the most desirable profession, and every company needed, so many different recruiters, and it was hard to even find one recruiter. I think at one point in 2021, it was harder to hire a recruiter than it was a software engineer, which is mind blowing. But I think, and I know at Salesloft, like we did scale our TA team during that time to keep up with demand. And hindsight is 2020 now, like when we're in a different market and a market that's maybe starting to stabilize. And this is more along the lines of what the market's going to be and how companies are going to grow moving forward. I think a big thing that we are looking at is sort of the capacity planning piece. So knowing like what is our team able to deliver regardless of external factors? Like what are the key metrics and what should we be able to deliver? And if we added an additional recruiter, like we'd be able to deliver this. But I think I'm taking it one step further and looking at capacity in sort of 3 ways, which are the people. So do we have the right roles within our team? Are we specialized enough or generalized enough or like to be able to serve the business? But then also our processes, are they allowing us to have more capacity? Are they acting as intended, right? Because I do think processes could be put in place to slow down certain areas or to speed up. And then I think the last piece is technology. So how do we use technology to give us more capacity? And I think there are a lot of tools on the market today that are allowing teams to think about maybe more responsible scaling or the ability to sort of expand or contract based on the business needs at any time.
Yeah, and that also brings me to my next question, which is the candidate experience, right? It's also one of those things that ultimately is top of mind as it contributes to the entire, impression of a brand itself as an employer, right? So do you have an ideal hiring process in terms of speeding and success rate? And how would you define something that's ideal?
Yeah. I think ideal is a difficult word when we're talking about hiring process, because I do think that ideal for Salesloft could look drastically different than ideal for a different company, a different size, whatever it might be. I think for us, our focus is on I think candidate experience is top of mind, regardless of what the process looks like. However, I think at Salesloft, we really we don't have the shortest interview process. I'll be totally transparent. We have multiple steps in our interview process. However, we try to be extremely intentional about our steps. We do believe that the interview process is an evaluation for both parties. And so we want to make sure they're the right fit for us just as much as we want to make sure we're the right fit for them. With that being said, I think we do have metrics in place, right, around sort of speed and success rate for us. We look at offer acceptance. We look at time to hire. So like the amount of time a candidate actually spends in the process. We also look at time to fill and sort of, how are we performing against the business's needs? So like vacancy rates, like if someone leaves, like how long is it going to take us to fill that role? Because obviously in times like today, I think all teams are feeling a bit more pressure. And so we know that if someone were to leave and unexpectedly, that team is feeling like twice as much pressure. But I think with all of that being said, again, I feel like are able to have a longer intentional process because we're really transparent about it. So sort of during that first initial call they have with a recruiter, we're outlining the entire process. We're sending sort of a follow-up email with the process outline. So they know how much time they can expect. They know that, this could take 2 weeks based on your availability. This could take 3 weeks, but we're pretty open and flexible and very clear on what we're looking to identify or for them to identify in each step as well.
And you mentioned process, being sort of a double-edged sword, right? Like you said, some could slow it down and some could speed it up. So in terms of reviewing these processes and, how do you go about doing that? How often do you do it? What is the source of information that you use? How does data play a part in this?
Yeah. So I think data is so important within the TA space, right? So, I think that, again, kind of going back to the process and the need to slow down or speed up, it changes with the market. And so I think that when we talk about TA processes, you're never done, right? And so what works today may not work 2 weeks from now. And so you've got to have, a sense of flexibility and be prepared to sort of adjust as needed. And be nimble as a recruiting team to sort of, again, meet the needs of the business, but also meet the needs of the candidate market. And so I think I can think of a few examples of points in a process where you may use it to slow down, and that's okay as long as it's intentional and you're being transparent about it. Because I think candidate experience, so much of it is around making sure that you are being transparent with the candidate and they know where they stand at all points, right? So it doesn't matter if, or it does matter, but it's okay if you don't have feedback right after an interview but a recruiter should still be following up with a candidate, thanking them for their time, making sure they know that we understand that interviewing is a big time commitment and it's exhausting and it requires a lot of energy. And so even though I don't have feedback now, I wanted to thank you for, being a part of our process. I think checking in when you say you're going to check in. So again, I think so much of it comes back to just being transparent, and that's what makes candidates feel like they're being seen, they're being heard, and their time is being valued as much as our interviewers' time is.
And in terms of evaluating these processes internally, is there a sort of another process in place, or is there a mechanism in place to evaluate these processes internally?
Yeah. So I think one thing that we have started to do is introducing sort of like quarterly hiring manager surveys. So for any managers that have made a hire or have worked directly with recruiting, we're getting that sort of like qualitative feedback. And then combining that with, we use a tool that sort of creates dashboards around all of these different metrics within TA. And we're able to quickly be able to say, looking at the trends for the last 6 months or the last year, or year over year, this is how we're tracking, and sort of be able to pull back and say, like, maybe this is why. So I think it's a combination of multiple things. I also think sometimes we'll get a piece of feedback through like a candidate survey, and then that makes a light bulb go off, and you have to kind of sit in it and say, if one person is saying this, like, are they speaking for like larger groups, and like, how do we adjust for that, or when do we not need to adjust? And ultimately, obviously, it comes down to that combination of both the quantitative and the qualitative data that's going to help us sort of determine when it makes sense to jump in and change a process.
Let's talk about diversity, Amber. How does diversity, D&I really, play into talent acquisition strategies, in your industry? And what might be some ways that you've gone about implementing these initiatives or processes?
Yeah, I think DE&I is extremely important, not only for TA, right? But our DE&I doesn't just live with TA. I think that it's an entry point of how do we attract diverse talent, and how do we make sure that we're running a equitable, inclusive interview process. But I'll start by saying DE&I is really owned by everyone within the business, and really needs ELT and senior leadership buy-in and actions to truly be able to play out throughout your organization. But I think, very similar to other topics that we've discussed, for us, it really starts at looking at the data. And specific to TA, we look at sort of our hiring funnel and the pass-through rates. So looking at, what does diversity look like at the top of funnel for us? And then how does that population sort of move through the funnel, through our different steps of the interview, ultimately resulting in who are we hiring? And then looking at that trending to be able to come out with some initiatives based on the data. For us at Salesloft, I think, I'll also say it's okay if you don't get it all right the first time, because it's also a learning process. And so for us, we were very much as a TA team looking back at last year, 22. We were very focused on how do we increase diversity at the top of the funnel. So that's new partnerships. That is working directly with some of our ERG leads on expanding networks. We ran a new referral program specifically for underrepresented talent. And sort of coming out and looking at the data over the last year, we were able to pretty significantly move the needle at the top of the funnel. However, we didn't make as much progress when it came to the bottom of the funnel. And so when we saw that, right, coming into this year, our initiatives have changed, and what we're looking to do this year, we understand, right, that it's important to look at the full funnel. And so we want to remain focused on the top of the funnel and making sure that we're attracting diverse talent. But we also want to make sure that talent is moving through the process at the same rates as others. And so, what that's led us to this year is really looking at, are there parts of our process that aren't as inclusive as we thought they were? Return focus on interview training and around implicit and unconscious bias, and having our recruiters really be advocates for that talent, and feeling comfortable in those uncomfortable conversations with leaders sometimes. And I think that also works for us at Salesloft because of our culture. And so we're comfortable having those not so easy conversations based on, the principles of our culture and our team philosophy. But that's what we're doing at Salesloft. But again, it's a learning process. And I think it's also taking the time to listen to that talent internally, to make sure that we're able to retain them as well.
Now, attracting the top of funnel would require more effort on employer branding and ultimately your EVP, right? So what is your approach towards developing a strong EVP? One that aligns your culture needs and your skills requirements.
Yeah. So I think as part of an EVP, I think we have a very strong employer brand at Salesloft. But as it relates to an EVP, it's something that constantly needs to be, not constantly, but should be reevaluated on a regular cadence, especially if you think about all of those disruptions over the last 3 years. So, what a candidate is looking for or values, or a candidate or an employee even values today is drastically different than what people were looking for pre 2020. And so I think evolving your EVP as your company evolves. But I think the other thing with an EVP is, your company can be a great place to work. That does not mean that it's the perfect place for everyone. And so making sure you're really clear on like what does set you apart and what sets you apart from your competition and what does current and future talent want, like really taking in all of those things to help influence what your employee value proposition um, is really important. And so here at Salesloft, we're actually kind of going through this exercise, or we'll start going through that exercise in the coming quarter, because we realized, does everything that we have out there still ring true, or is that what's most important to people? And I think a lot of it is. So I don't think we're going to be like changing things dramatically, but I think there's opportunity to really refine, because it needs to be. I think our EVP needs to be not only current state but future thinking as well.
So speaking of the EVP and top of funnel, attracting diverse talent pool to Salesloft and identifying who actually fits the company and what you can provide them, right? So what are some traits that you look out for when you search for top talent?
What I will say is like specific to Salesloft, it we'll go back to our values, and ensuring there's alignment and that person is bringing something new and special to our team. But like I said earlier, how we do things is just as important as what we're doing at Salesloft. And so we actually have a step in our process that is a core values interview. And so it's an opportunity for a candidate to meet with two folks that sit outside of the department that they will be working in. And the 25 minutes are spent talking about our values and why they're important and how they show up at work. And so I think that's one thing that's, maybe unique in regards to traits. And we have a mixture of, or we allow employees to opt into either being in office. We still have office space in our headquarters in Atlanta, in our EMEA headquarters in London, and an office in Guadalajara, Mexico. So employees local to those markets do have the option to go into the office. We have a hybrid option where you're in the office for 2 days or less per week, and then we have that remote space. And so I think that being clear on like someone's motivations, how they work best, what works best for them or their team, like all of those things are taken into consideration. And so that's something that's top of mind for our wider people leadership team as well. How do we make sure that employees do still feel connected to their team, immediate team, but cross-functionally as well?
So speaking about connectivity, I mean, technology plays a big role in this to connect people, at least remotely, and in the different working arrangements that we're seeing now. There's also been widespread adoption of AI into almost every or many aspects of business today, right? So as TA professionals, how do you think AI can help?
I think that first and foremost, as TA professionals, but really anyone in the workforce today, we have to get comfortable and accept that AI is here. And I think if those who aren't able to adopt and adjust are probably going to get left behind at one point. And so for us, there are a few ways that we're trying to experiment with like a chat GPT today. So one thing is like, typically when you're thinking about like writing a new process or coming up with a project, the hardest part is just getting started. And so using prompts to be able to say, help me outline what building a new interview training would look like, and then being able to take that as a sort of foundation and really make it your own. I think also in the same vein, writing candidate outreach, like getting creative, and then obviously adjusting and personalizing, getting started on job descriptions. Job descriptions are time consuming, but so important. And so if there's a way that AI can step in and help our managers articulate what they're looking for, I think that's helpful. I think the last kind of way that it can be used is to help recruiters become more knowledgeable about the roles that they're recruiting for, right? We've never, for most of us, we've never worked in those specific roles. And so asking questions and learning more about those specific domains or expertises, so that you can have a meaningful conversation with an expert or a candidate. I think it's another way that recruiters can start to utilize ChatGPT or AI in some way.
So recruitment technology in and of itself, right, comes with AI technology as well, and the ability to shorten the amount of work that you do. So Amber, what has been the impact of recruitment technology for hiring in your experience?
Yeah, I think it's been huge. I think that it was great in a time where we were extremely busy and a larger team, but it's just as much, if not more important now that we're in a stage where we're trying to do more with less, and really, identifying where technology is going to enhance our candidate experience, enhance our hiring manager experience, but also make sure that it allows us as recruiters to be focusing our time in the most impactful places. So I'm a huge proponent of, utilizing technology in different ways. I think that there are so many new and interesting tools that are coming out in the market today. So I think it really propels a team. And if you're comfortable and really jumping in and, embracing technology, it's going to allow you to outpace others as well.
So what might be some ways that you use data from recruitment technology, such as an ATS?
Yeah. So I think it goes back to earlier in our discussion, whether it's, do we need to evaluate processes? Do we need to evaluate our, interview process? Another way specifically to ATS is looking at things like, as it relates back to process, is looking at things like drop-off rates of candidates. So, it's common for us in some of our technical roles to have a technical offline. And I think we've more often than not been able to use the data to influence decisions on, is this the right assessment, or are we asking someone to take too much time or not enough time or whatever it might be. But I think it in general gives us more data points to be able to make sure that the decisions that we are making are the right decisions.
And these data points come at a shorter time frame, so you get to experiment more and quicker and become more agile, as you said, right, with technology.
Absolutely.
What advice would you give someone starting out in talent acquisition today?
So I think the most important thing is to be curious. So ask questions, whether that's in candidate calls and getting to know people. I think people love talking about themselves and things that they're passionate about. And so making sure that you're asking those questions, but also really ingraining yourself in the wider business and asking questions, from across different departments to truly understand like what they do and what's most important to them. I think if you have that business acumen and curiosity, you're going to be successful, not only in TA, but, whatever you might choose to do if you don't choose to stay in TA for your entire career.
Well, thank you very much, Amber, for your time and your insights into how to structure a talent acquisition function in the midst of all these disruptions that we see today, right? And also this emphasis on process and how to streamline that using technology, using data, using observations and engagement internally as well as externally. So I'm sure the audience listening in would want to find out more. So what's your preferred platform?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me, Lydia. It has been an absolute pleasure sharing all of these insights. best place to find me is on LinkedIn. It's easy. It's just my first and last name. And you'll see that I am the director of talent at Salesloft. So super easy to find me there.
Excellent. And we have been in conversation with Amber Schwartz, the Director of Talent Acquisition at Salesloft. Thank you for joining us. And remember to subscribe to YouTube and Spotify to stay tuned for more weekly episodes of All in Recruitment.